Welcome to my channel, everyone. Today, I'm thrilled to have Dr. Anthony Chaffee here with me. He is an American medical doctor specializing in neurosurgery, and for the past 20 years, he has been researching diet and nutrition and their impact on health and chronic diseases. He's widely known as the plant-free doctor. It's great to have you here, Dr. Chaffee.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So your insights have helped countless people improve their health through dietary changes. That includes myself. So today I'll be peppering you with questions. First,
Good.
I want to clarify the definition of carnivore. What is the carnivore diet? I've read that humans are considered hypercarnivores. That means they obtain 70% of their nutrition from animal products. So what is the carnivore diet?
Well, the carnivore diet is just what it sounds like. You're just eating meat and drinking water, and that's pretty much it. And it's considered a lot of different things. One way you could consider it is an elimination diet. You're just eliminating out all the different types of food that people could have a problem with. We only came to agriculture about 10,000 years ago, and it's sort of in the name, the agricultural revolution. It revolutionized the way we ate. If we were eating just a bunch of plants before that, then it wouldn't have been much of a revolution. So it was a revolution, and it changed significantly how we were eating, where we were getting the preponderance of our calories and nutrition from prior to that, and actually after that as well in most parts of the world, because agriculture was only in isolated areas. The majority of our food was coming from animal nutrition. And so this is just going back to that, just going back to eating predominantly meat and water, or exclusively meat and water, which a lot of people would have done going back millions of years if they had access to it. We tended to use plants as a more of a survival mechanism. If we didn't get enough meat, then we would alternatively go to other sources, plants and fruit and things like that. And then some cultures decided to start, decided it was easier to plant and grow these things. So it's just going back to that, to our biological roots. We have been Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens have been around for about 300,000 years. And our genetics really haven't changed much in that time. Very, very subtle changes here and there. So we're 300,000-year-old species living in a very, very modern time that these things that we're eating now and putting in our bodies and in our environments have only existed in a blink of an eye. And so we may live in the modern world, but our genetics are living 300,000 years ago during an ice age. And so it's just going back to that and just eating meat and seeing how you do. And a lot of people are finding that this reverses or eliminates out massive health issues and medical issues and some major medical conditions that heretofore doctors had no idea what they were being caused by. And so, my idea is that these diseases aren't really diseases per se. They're actually toxicities and malnutrition, the toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet and a lack of species specific nutrition, namely too many plants and other artificial ingredients that are actually toxic to our body that build up over time, just like smoking and drinking doesn't kill you overnight, but over years and decades, it will cause
like the grains,
disease.
the sugar.
Exactly. All of these things have low-grade toxins, some of them high-grade toxins, and you have to cook them or ferment them or soak them in lye and other sorts of caustic chemicals in order to break down those toxins. But a lot of the beans that we eat, for instance, like kidney beans, red kidney beans can kill you if you don't cook them.
There have been
Right.
incidences where
There have.
teenagers
And
didn't know
so,
that they had to do that and they died, or they
yeah,
were like
that's it.
severely sick.
Well, as little as 5 raw kidney beans, or even undercooked kidney beans, like if you don't cook them all the way, if you don't cook them enough, they can do serious harm. So as little as 5 undercooked or raw kidney beans,
Or
as
bitter
reported by the
almonds.
WHO, the World Health Organization, who is no friend to the carnivore diet, they
Oh,
report that that as little as 5 raw or undercooked kidney beans have put people in the hospital. Okay, so you get 10 of those things, then you can get quite seriously hurt. So it's very little. It's a very small amount. So some of these things are quite toxic, and yet we eat them because we figured out chemical processes of lowering the toxic load and bringing out some more nutrients and making them more bioavailable. But just because we lower the toxic load doesn't mean that that completely eliminates it. Oh, we cook it. Oh, and now there's no toxins anymore. No, that's not true. It denatures some of the toxins to
but not all
some
of them,
degree, but not
like
all of them,
oxalates.
and not completely. Exactly. Oxalates will not get denatured
How about
by
cyanide in almonds? I think
cyanide
bitter
almonds.
almonds are like especially high in cyanide.
Yeah, bitter almonds are extremely high in cyanide is very high in the bitter almonds. Bitter almonds are the little, if you break open the stone of a peach or a nectarine, it looks like a sort of a shriveled up almond. And and so it's called a bitter almond. And yeah,
I ate
one
those
or
as a
two of those
kid
can kill an adult.
because I thought
Yeah.
I could.
Yeah, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also like the seeds of apples, they were really bitter, and I was
Yeah.
told not to eat them, but of course I ate the
Yeah.
entire apple every time. So
Well, a lot of people do. Yeah. Yeah.
these toxins, are they then the cause for chronic disease? Because you also studied chronic disease.
Mhm.
Yeah, what is it in plants that causes chronic disease and in animal food that would get rid of that?
Well, it's well, there are a lot of these different toxins. So the plant kingdom makes about 1 million different defensive chemicals to stop animals and insects from eating them. And this is a bit funny when people think about, oh, but vegetables are so good, because we've just been inundated with this idea that vegetables are so good for us. However, any botanist will tell you this, and I've spoken to many botanists and professors of botany and biology who've written entire books about all these different toxins that are in plants and how you have to be really careful when eating plants. And my professor of cancer biology is actually the one who sort of encouraged us to stop eating plants, because, well, he didn't encourage us to. He just said that he didn't and he wouldn't, because plants are toxic and they're trying to kill you, and they're very carcinogenic and have, dozens, if not over 100 known carcinogens in them. And so these these toxins, low grade or high grade, when they build up in your system over time, they will cause dysfunction in your biology and your physiology. And then we call this a disease, and this manifests in certain ways. But cyanide poisoning manifests as a certain disease. Cyanide damages directly the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. So it damages the mitochondria. And we're seeing more and more and more in the disease pathophysiology of various chronic diseases. But a lot of it comes down to damaged mitochondria. And so things like cyanide or these other sorts of things, and they damage that mitochondria, they can precipitate all sorts of chronic diseases, such as cancer, for instance. That was shown by Nobel Prize winner Otto Warburg nearly 100 years ago now, that all cancers, all known cancers, have damaged mitochondria that can't go through oxidative phosphorylation. So they have to go through a fermentative process, which is much less efficient, causes a lot of free radicals and damage to the cell. And this is the hallmark of every cancer that we know about. And that they don't all have genetic changes. They don't all have, some don't even have any genetic changes, and others, like some cells, will have genetic changes and others won't, but they'll all have damaged mitochondria. So this is the idea that when you damage your mitochondria enough, you get cancer sometimes.
So the
And
damage, I heard Professor Lustig talk about that, and he said that
Mhm.
sugar, for example, mucks up the
Fructose.
mitochondria. It's not really damaged, but it
Mhm.
makes them less functional.
Specifically fructose. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, he
Yeah,
talked about fructose.
which is the sweet part of sugar. That actually does, yeah. That's Dr. Lustig talks about how that can damage the mitochondria directly. And your body can use,
That makes fructose a poison, right?
yeah, yeah, in certain
A
doses.
slow
Yeah.
poison.
Sorry?
A
A
slow
slow
poison.
poison. Yeah, exactly. And slow poison is poison. And that's the thing
Yes.
that people don't understand. They say that, like, oh, well, kids eat sugar all the time, people eat sugar all the time. They're like, right. And we're getting fatter and sicker than we've ever been in human history. And there's the reason, oh, but it's because too many calories. That's an absolute con. And that's a con propagated by companies like Coca-Cola that say, exercise is medicine, just get your calorie balance right and all that sort of stuff. Because if it's just calories in, calories out, well, then all calories are equal, including a Coke. And so the calories from a Coke is exactly the same as the calories from the food that we've been eating for 2 million years. And of course, that's nonsense.
I'm fighting
And
on Twitter to get like that. It's one of my pet peeves, psycho
Mhm.
or Kiko or whatever. Um, yeah. No, a calorie is not I mean, a calorie is a calorie,
Um,
but the effect on the human body from different foods is obviously completely different.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's trickery with language, isn't it? Because a calorie is a calorie, because a calorie is just a unit of heat measure, of heat
Right.
energy, that if you burn something, a certain amount of energy escapes. And so yeah, that amount of energy is the same,
But we
but that's
don't
not how our
eat
body works.
calories.
We're not combustion engines. We don't
No,
burn things inside of our body. We're chemical factories, and our bodies make chemical reactions with all these different chemicals. And so those chemicals, even though they have different amount of calories, they don't have the same chemical interactions in our body. They don't have the same hormonal interactions in our body. Fructose and glucose both have 4 kilocalories per gram, but glucose is can be used by the mitochondria for energy in different parts of your body. It can be a positive thing. That's why we make glucose in certain amounts. Above that amount, we only have 4 grams of glucose running through our blood system at any given time. And if we get more than that, even 1 extra gram, that's actually toxic to our body. So that's a problem too. And people don't know that. But fructose itself uh, can directly damage mitochondria, even at much lower levels than that. It is processed by our liver to make the same, break down the same byproducts as alcohol. So you get the same damage to your liver and your body as alcohol. You get fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, diabetes, heart disease,
I was
and all
there.
these other
Well,
sorts of
not at
problems.
cirrhosis, but at NASH. So I know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, this affects the body very differently. It has different hormonal responses too. Fructose specifically, they'll both raise insulin, but to different degrees. Glucose more than fructose initially has a higher glycemic index, but fructose will independently block and upregulate other hormones, such as blocking leptin, which is our satiety hormone, and will upregulate ghrelin, which is our hunger hormone. So you end up being more hungry and say, oh my gosh, I got to eat, I got to eat, I got to eat. So the amount of energy that you get when you burn something, sure, that's the same, but we don't do that, right? So you have a
Yes.
block of wood, that's all glucose. Those are just strings of glucose in the form of cellulose. And you can eat all the wood you want. You're not going to get any nutrition from it. You're not going to get any calories from it.
It
You're not
has
going to get any
calories
energy
though.
from it. It has a lot of
But yeah,
calories. That's
so
why when you burn wood, it burns.
fructose is also, I think, 7 to 10 times or 11 times more glycating than
Yeah.
glucose. And what do you
Yeah.
tell people on, let's say on X or anywhere, when they tell you, well, fructose in fruit is natural? I
Mhm.
know high fructose corn syrup, that's not good, or sugar, plain sugar is not good, but in an apple, it's natural.
Well, it's natural in sugarcane too,
Yeah.
and it's all natural. It all comes from nature. This is, we're not making this in the lab. And we're getting, sugar and bags of sugar and fructose and honey, all these sorts of things come from nature. And arsenic is natural too. And in fact, most things that are natural that come in nature are actually toxic and going to kill you, and not things that we're supposed to eat. We're actually supposed to eat very limited things in the world. And we have hundreds of thousands of varieties of plants, and they make about 1 million different chemicals, most of which will kill you, and they're all natural. And so the well, this is natural argument doesn't really make sense, because
Mhm.
we're not in the Garden of Eden where just everything is available for us to eat. And it's just not. And you can find that out real quickly and permanently if you go out in the woods and just start eating random plants. You are not going to make it. And
No.
I don't recommend anyone do that, because you can die and or get very, very sick, permanently sick. In fact, I've had a lot of botanists and biologists reach out to me and go like, of course, I mean, of course, this is how plants defend themselves. Like this is botany 101. And I had one guy. He was actually vegan vegetarian up until he saw my lecture at a medical conference called "Plants Are Trying to Kill You," which is what my botany or cancer biology professor said to me 20 some years ago, or to the class really, and I was in. And And he looked at that and he was just like, he's like, I was a foraging vegan. I would go out in the woods and parks and things like that, and I'd forage around and I'd find different plants because you had to know which ones you could eat because they were so toxic. He's like, of course they're toxic. Of course they're trying to kill you. Like I knew this. I do this. I did this for years. I went around the woods just finding just the exact right plants because all the other ones were toxic, and I knew that. Why the hell didn't that ever, didn't I ever make that connection? So and he switched to carnivore right away, and he was saying that he was feeling amazing and just so much better than he had in years. So it's very interesting how people come to this, but it's those are facts.
So
This is not me making this up.
are there certain studies that convince you like this is the way to go? Carnivore is the way to go.
It's a conglomeration of a lot of studies. I mean, there's not just one carnivore study. In fact, there's very
Yes,
few
right.
that
Yeah.
are just
But if
specifically
you had it would be great if you could share them with me, then I can
carnivore.
put them in the description for others to read, like the ones that are
Yeah.
maybe most important, like I don't know, top 10 or so.
Well, it's a whole argument, isn't it? Because you have to undo a lot of dogma, and you have to but things about meat being bad, how it causes cancer, and how it's going to cause heart disease, and how fat and saturated fat and cholesterol are toxic to the body. We just make all this toxic, horrible cholesterol that just kills us slowly from the inside because that makes
Those studies
sense,
come out on a daily basis.
Yeah,
Eggs are
and
going to
so
kill you, red meat's going to kill you,
yeah. Well, those aren't even
going to
studies.
clog
Those
up
are
your
just those are
arteries.
just yeah, those are just news articles of just people making accusations. That's just marketing from the honestly from the processed food industry because they need to vilify meat because they want everyone to go plant-based because they know if you go plant-based, the large majority of people, they're not eating fresh quinoa. What they're doing is they're eating processed food and ready-made
Right.
meals, which is what they are providing, junk food. And so that's their market, and so this is just marketing, and so it's understandable that they're going to do that, but it's a lie, and they shouldn't be allowed to lie and to say that
Yeah, how
something
do
is
they get away
healthy or
with that?
unhealthy.
I mean, I just had that
Yeah.
discussion. How do scientists that make sh flawed, I'm not going to use a swear word, flawed science, how do they get away with making these claims? How it's
Yeah.
obviously not true.
Well, it's with the law and all this sort of things, you have to prove intent that you're intending to defraud and all that sort of stuff. But we actually do have evidence of a lot of people who have defrauded the public and have been paid to do so. We have
Yeah, like the
correspondence going
Framingham
between,
study, wasn't that?
sorry,
The
the
Framingham
Framingham study.
study?
Well, that was just the American Heart Association
They were like
misrepresented.
withholding data.
Well, they just flat out changed it. They said that the Framingham study showed that as you increased cholesterol levels in people, they followed people for like 20 years in the Framingham study, and then looked at different biomarkers and health outcomes. So it's not a something that can show cause and effect relationships, but it can potentially show associations. And so the American Heart Association, 2 years after the Framingham study was complete, they said that there was an association found in the data with higher cholesterol and higher rates of cardiovascular disease mortality rates, so more deaths from heart attacks and strokes. But in fact, the data actually showed the exact opposite, showed that as you lowered cholesterol and total cholesterol, that cardiovascular disease mortality rate went up. So it was actually an inverse association. And so this whole cholesterol heart hypothesis really should never have gotten off the ground because there were inverse associations. And so misrepresenting things to that degree and harming people, which it does harm people, of course it does. If you have your own studies and your own data showing that avoiding certain meats and lowering your cholesterol, that actually causes harm, and you're pushing the opposite and saying no, it doesn't cause, no, it's actually the opposite, it's actually the other way around, and you're pushing that, and then that's influencing recommendations and guidelines for decades. I mean, that's going to cause a huge burden of disease and harm, and that's intentional. That's a malice of forethought. I mean, you shouldn't
Yeah.
be able to get away with that. But look at I mean, but there's a precedent for these people getting away with it, which is why they continue to do it. You look at Philip Morris and all the other tobacco companies, they got brought in front of the American Congress and Senate. I think it's Senate hearings as well. And they were saying, hey, like cigarettes seem to be bad for people, and there's all these studies coming out, and you're pushing this stuff, and it's harmful to people. And they're like, well, but we have studies that say it's not, and it's really good for you, and it doesn't cause problems, and it doesn't cause cancer, and it's not addictive, and it doesn't cause emphysema, and all that sort of stuff. And of course they were lying, and we found
Yep.
out they were lying, and we found their internal memos talking about how they were lying and how they were paying off people to, different scientists and things like that that had no scruples or morals or ethical code, and were just happy to be paid off to hurt people, which is ultimately what they were doing. And so they got fined, and they said, hey, you've been lying for 30 years. We have your documents. They got leaked. And so they got fined, I think something like $400 billion, which is a huge sum, especially back in the 80s, which is when this happened. But you're talking about, hundreds of millions of people, potentially billions of people being hurt and affected by their product. And a lot of those people dying, and dying early, dying of
Yeah,
cancer,
it's
dying
more
of
than being
emphysema.
hurt. They lost limbs, they lost they couldn't
Yeah.
work. The families were suffering. So there is so much despair. And that's the one thing that really makes me angry. Not about just
Yeah.
tobacco, but also sugar, because they did the same thing. They hid the facts too, that it was addictive and everything. So
Well, and that's the thing. So how is that not a criminal act?
in my
To your
opinion, it
point,
is.
like, how do these people get away with it?
Yeah.
I think these people should be prosecuted criminally. I think
Yep.
100% they should be prosecuted criminally. And it absolutely infuriates me that the executives and everybody involved at the tobacco companies who were lying and perjuring them. I mean, first of all, perjuring, lying to Congress is a crime in and of itself. You can go to jail. I don't know if any of these people did. They probably did not. They probably just got fined and a slap on the wrist. But they were doing things that knowingly caused harm, and knowingly, and they knew were going to kill people and kill a lot of people. And they were trying to
Yeah.
push this out to children and make candy cigarettes and try to advertise to kids
I
through
had those when
candy.
I was little. They
I
were
did
either
too.
chocolate or chewing gum. Yep.
Yeah, I had a
And
chewing gum that had like
were so
powdered sugar.
cool.
You could
Like,
blow on it and it blow it
yep.
out. Yeah. Yeah. But I got those once, I remember, as a kid. I'm like, oh yeah. And I was just like, hmm. And I sort of thought to myself, like, oh yeah, it looks like puff out. And I was just like, no one believes this. No one thinks this is actually a secret, and so, but in any case, that's what they were trying to do. They're trying to glamorize this to kids and make chewing gum candy cigarettes. And we have the memos talking about, we're not allowed to advertise to kids, so let's make candy cigarettes and candy and things like that, and that will get them thinking about smoking, and then they'll want to smoke. And it worked. It absolutely worked. I remember as a kid, um, you know, wanting those candy cigarettes and buying them at one point when I had the money for it. And to the point that I was like so interested in smoking that, like, one time I picked up someone's like cigarette butt that was still had something left. I was like, oh, try. I was like 5 or 6, and I tried. It was so noxious and horrible. I was just like, oh God, and coughed up, and hated that. So but it got me interested as a kid. So their marketing was working, and
Yeah.
at least in my case, it made me interested in smoking. And thankfully, it didn't take long term, but it's very predatory, and I think it is absolutely criminal, because they're knowingly doing something that causes harm, and they're lying about it, and they're misleading people
It's not
and
just
lying
the
about it.
cigarettes, it's the sugar, the cereals, all these
But it's all
that's
of this
all
stuff.
marketed to kids and the parents.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Philip Morris and the other big tobacco giants in the 1980s, when people started smoking less, they started buying up a lot of the major food companies, food
Yes,
organizations.
exactly.
And
Same
so they became
playbook.
some of the largest, exactly. So they became some of the largest processed food manufacturers and sugar producers and sugar product producers in the world. And then they got same marketing team and same side to say, hey, let's make this as addictive as possible. Now we can advertise to kids, and all these boxes became like bright and colorful and all these sorts of things. It's just sensory overload.
Captain Crunch.
Um,
Yeah, they understood the assignment. And I
yeah,
actually, when I had my kids and they were little, I thought Cheerios were a health food. I actually believed
yep.
that.
So did
It's
we.
good for the
Yeah.
finger, like the motor development, everything. And they ate, they still eat it. Oh,
Yeah. Well, we used to eat boxes of Cheerios when I
yep.
was a kid. That was like the best one we had. It was that or shredded wheat, and it was just like, oh God, that stuff was so awful. But that was the thing. You're supposed to have, like whole fiber, whole grains, all that sort of stuff. And my father was really, well, both my parents were very concerned about our health and having good nutrition and having us eat right from an early age and not having sugar cereals and not have junk food and not have
Nice.
fat and all that sort of stuff. So it was skim milk. All the fat was trimmed off the meat and the steaks, um, and it was freaking Cheerios and shredded wheat. And almost never did we get like a sugar. I mean, almost never, like once a year, maybe less. And never had sodas. The most we would have got would have been like orange juice or something, some sort of fruit juice. But that was pretty rare too. And it just got devoured because it was 5 kids. We never had anything sweet in the house. And so
Yeah.
as soon as like anything sweet, like like even fruit juice or something like that would come in the house, it was just devoured instantly. Or like a bag of chips or something like that. Sometimes when my mom was doing like a grocery run, she might buy a little treat or something, and then people that were there and helped her bring in groceries, they would get rewarded with a treat or something like that, and it would just get devoured instantly because like we just never had that stuff in the house. So my parents really wanted to do the right thing for us, and they bought into this, and so tons and tons and tons of Cheerios. Oh, it's heart healthy, and this based on what? Based on the fact that it has some fiber in it and it can lower your cholesterol by a couple of points.
And it's
And
probably added fiber and anything like
oh yeah, 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 yeah,
magic
and
dust.
yeah, well, it's yeah, sawdust. They add
Oh,
sawdust to a
yeah.
lot of products to increase the fiber content because that's what fiber is. It's
Mm.
sawdust. It's cellulose. It's just wood. That's what fiber is.
That's what
And
most
so
people don't know. If it says
mm,
cellulose on the ingredients, that's sawdust. They don't
yeah,
know that, but that's sawdust.
yeah, and there's fiber. If it's so added fiber, all these sorts of things. They'll often use sawdust. Yeah, it's the same thing. It's exactly the same stuff. It's same chemical compound.
There is some
Cellulose.
other cotton something, but let's get back to
Mm,
carnivore. So, most people like myself, I started with keto, dirty keto, ketovore,
mhm.
carnivore, and now the line diet for 7 weeks.
Nice.
Um, what advice would you give someone who just wants to start out and doesn't know how?
Well, the main thing is no, focusing on meat. Just eat more and more fat because we've just been inundated with this idea that fat is just so toxic to us, but it's actually very necessary. Fat is what makes the animal kingdom go around. For carnivores and herbivores, carnivores eat animals with fat and they go for the fat first. And they often get 70 to 80% of their calories from fat if they can. And then herbivores actually get the majority of their calories from fat too, because they actually break down cellulose. We don't break down cellulose. We can't. No animal has cellulase, certainly not vertebrate animals. Even termites don't make cellulase. It's actually the microorganisms in the guts of herbivores and even termites that make cellulase and devour the cellulose. So a cow or a horse or a gorilla will eat these fibrous plants, and the bacteria ferment and break that down because they're eating the cellulose. And then as a byproduct, they actually excrete saturated fat. And then the bacteria or the protozoa die off, and those are absorbed as protein and other sort of nutrients as well. So they're eating plants that are a bunch of fiber and glucose, but what they're absorbing is 70 to 80% calories from fat and the rest from protein, very little from carbohydrates. And so we're all in a ketogenic state naturally, typically, most things. I mean, honeybees, what the hell they do, I have no idea. But the vast majority of herbivores eat fibrous plants and they break that down into fat and protein. So it's not being afraid of fat, eating a lot more fat than you ever thought was safe, healthy, or reasonable. And as you actually need it, you actually need the majority of your calories from fat. So 70–80% calories from fat, that's 1 to 2 grams of fat for every 1 gram of protein. So it's a lot of fat. And that's not, like every ounce of lean meat that's not all protein, and the fat isn't all grams of fat. It's about 65% lean meat with 35% fat. That's 2 grams of fat to 1 gram of protein. So it's still a lot of fat, but it's not like 75% fat and then just a little bit of lean meat.
It's not a big slob of butter.
No, I mean you can. I mean you can add in a bit of butter on top of something. And so if something's a bit lean and you want to add in some grass-fed butter, that's fine. Most people do fine with butter. Some people maybe just have a strong reaction to dairy and may need to avoid that. But if you don't, most people don't. But that's pretty much it. You just eat fatty meat. You eat the type of meat that you enjoy. Seafood's fine. Eggs are fine for most people. If you have autoimmune issues, usually you want to stick to the lion diet, just red meat and water, ruminant meat,
Yep.
cows and lamb and things like that. And you just eat the type of meat that you enjoy, that makes you feel good, that you can afford and that you have access to.
Do they
And
dive in head first, or should they have a
I
period
think
where
it's
they
fine too.
adjust?
Yeah. It depends. I think it's more of a logistical issue. If you're the type of person and you say, okay, I'm just going to strike while the iron's hot and just jump in, I think that's perfectly fine. Some people find that they need to transition a bit, and some people find that it's they feel better when they transition, and that's totally fine. So just see how it works for you. I see a lot of people that I mean, I transitioned right away. I just, I learned how toxic these things were. And I said, right, I'm not going to eat any of that stuff. And I just jumped headfirst into it, and I felt better right away. And the vast majority of people who follow me on social media and YouTube were formerly plant-based and vegans and vegetarians.
And then
And
they
they
switched.
and they switched. Yeah. And so a lot of these people have been plant-based vegetarians, vegans for years. And then they just said, yep, not eating that anymore. And then they jump headfirst into carnivore, switch overnight, and have dramatic improvements. But however you want to do it, just what you ultimately doing, you're just eating fatty meat until it stops tasting good. And if you're eating just meat and you're not eating a whole bunch of carbs and sugar that are going to derange your hunger signals, you actually can listen to your body now. It's very easy to undereat on a carnivore diet, so keep that in mind. You actually want to keep going. Don't just go until you go, oh, I can stop. That's too early. You're doing that because we couldn't
Or
trust our
maybe I
hunger
should
signals
stop,
before.
like the old
Yeah,
diet
should stop.
brain.
Yeah. Well, I could stop, so I should stop. Right? Because, when your hunger signals are deranged and your body's just telling you to constantly eat, you have to fight against it all the time. Well, that's not happening here. And so if you get to that point where I could stop, so I should stop, you're not going to eat enough. And so
Yep.
you want to eat until it stops tasting good. If the meat is tasting good, if fatty meat is tasting good, your body's telling you that it wants more of that. And eventually it will taste less and less good until eventually it doesn't taste good at all. And that's when you stop. So you get a bite that sort of tastes pretty bland and like cardboard, and you just say, okay, I don't actually want to take another bite. Great. You don't have to. And you shouldn't. So that's pretty much it. If you want to transition slowly, I would actually set a plan. So I'd say, okay, I'm cutting out sugar and carbs today and alcohol, right? Those are the major ones.
Yep.
And then next week, Friday, you mark the date. I'm going to cut out, you know, beans, seeds, legumes, grains, all that sort of stuff, nuts.
And the vegetable oils.
And the vegetable oils, yeah. And so you should have this marked sort of gradation. Okay, I'm going to knock these out here. I'm going to knock these out here. And just every week, you just take off another sort of chunk of this stuff. Okay, I'm taking out the high oxalate foods like, sweet potato and nightshades and spinach and things like that. Next week, I'm cutting out this. Next week, I'm cutting out this. And then on this date, usually you can get this done in about a month. And you just say, on this date, nothing but meat and water. And so if you're going to transition, you have to have a clear plan on how you're going to transition. If you just say, oh,
Yep.
I'll get to it and I'll just start cutting things down, you'll never do it. Like you'll start at first, you'll start sort of cutting-ish things down, but it's just like smoking cessation with we'll wean down over time, and then no one ever does that.
No,
You know,
actually,
they
I had that experience with getting off OxyContin. I was on that for years at a pretty high dose. And I made a plan. Every 4 weeks, I took one off, and it had to be
Mhm.
on the calendar. Otherwise, I could not have
Yeah.
done it. But
Yeah.
so when someone eats only meat, let's say only meat, not dairy, uh, what's about the calcium? How do they get enough calcium?
Well, your body uses these minerals and nutrients very differently and absorbs them very differently depending on what you eat. So if you're eating a lot of plants and they have all these different sorts of chemical compounds that are toxic to your body, well, how are they toxic? Well, they do different things in your body that disrupt your normal physiology. And some of that is how your body actually deposits and reabsorbs bone. And so, if you're taking a whole bunch of plants that have oxalates, those oxalates can go into your body. They can actually bind and strip out calcium and iron and other minerals. And so all of a sudden you're losing a lot of calcium in these minerals. And so your levels are going down, even though there's calcium and iron in spinach. It's not bioavailable. You can't absorb it. And they have oxalates and other anti-nutrients that actually remove out your calcium and iron and other minerals. And they actually have studies of this in the 1950s showing that giving people spinach because there's a lot of calcium in spinach actually lowered their calcium levels because calcium wasn't bioavailable and the oxalates got in and stripped out the calcium. Okay. So if calcium gets too low, your heart stops. Okay. So that's not good. You get
Nope.
tetany, all your muscles start tensing up, and your heart is a muscle and it tenses up and it stops beating because it's now cramped up and it can't beat. So you die. And so obviously your body's going to protect you from that. And so how does it do that? Well, it draws from your reserves of calcium in your bones. And so, you're starting to pull out and strip off calcium out of your bones. And so over time, you can develop osteoporosis, osteopenia. And that doesn't that's an abnormal physiological state. So you need an abundance of calcium to try to offset these oxalates that you're eating. So the RDAs they were made at a time when people were just eating a mixed diet. So we actually don't know how much we actually need if we're not eating a lot of anti-nutrients and different things that disrupt our physiology.
It's
Vitamin
probably the
C, for
same for
example.
vitamin C, right?
Yeah, about exactly. So we're told that we need at least 10 milligrams of vitamin C a day to not get scurvy. And then we should probably have more like 90 to 120 milligrams for other normal workings of our body. But just to not get the deficiency scurvy, which is the vitamin C deficiency that we know about, you need at least 10 milligrams, which is not that much. But why do you get scurvy? Well, scurvy is a misdevelopment and misfolding of collagen molecules, which are proteins, which is what our bones and tissue are made out of. And you need hydrolyzed amino acids called proline and lysine. So if it's just normal proline and lysine, they sort of they're not sterically compatible, and so they sort of push away from each other and they repel each other. And so you have this loose braided collagen that's just not very strong and it just breaks down. And so our tissue and our vessels start breaking down.
So that's why the
Uh,
bleeding start.
you get some bleeding in your gums, but you also get internal bleeding. You'll get arterial dissections and things like that, and you die. It's very dangerous. And so vitamin C catalyzes a reaction, speeds up a reaction that hydrolyzes proline and lysine, so you can get tight, strong collagen. But the thing is that if you're eating a lot of meat that has collagen, you're already getting hydrolyzed proline and lysine. You don't actually need vitamin C to hydrolyze proline and lysine de novo on its own. And and so as a result of that, you simply don't need vitamin C to not get scurvy. Now you may need vitamin C for other things, but not for scurvy. Like you won't get scurvy if you are eating enough meat. And this is something we saw in polar explorers when they went up and lived with the Inuit up in northern Canada or Alaska, and they were going up into the North Pole. It was the ones that ate the way the Inuit did and only ate meat. Those are the ones who did not get nutritional deficiencies and scurvy, but it was the ones that tried to eat their own food and a lot of breads and things like that, and sailor biscuits, hard biscuits. They were the ones getting very sick, and there's uh, many reports of this, of people who, in expedition, everyone was healthy as a horse, and then all of a sudden there was one that was getting very sick, very sick, very sick, and they found in their pack they had all this stashed food Western food and sailor's biscuits and things like that. And they're like, okay, get rid of all this crap. Just started giving them, raw fish
And
and
they
blubber
improved.
and things like that, and they recovered right away. So yeah, you simply don't need the same amount of nutrients. Also, carbohydrates compete for binding sites with vitamin C in your gut through the GLUT4 receptor. And so if you're eating carbohydrates, you need a million times as much vitamin
Yep.
C just to get proper absorption as you would otherwise. And there actually is enough vitamin C for our needs in meat. It's just we don't understand that because we think we need far more vitamin C than we
Hmm.
actually do, because you need a lot more of it to make collagen, which we don't need because we're eating collagen, we're getting the precursors, and we're also absorbing a lot more. But even if you look at the Maasai in Africa, who are carnivore, but they also drink a lot of milk, which has lactose, which are carbohydrates, which will compete for binding sites with vitamin C. They don't get scurvy either, right? And they don't have other nutritional deficiencies either. And that's something that's been tested for 100 years. There's a large study by the British, and they looked at the nutritional and developmental differences between the Maasai, who were carnivore and eating a lot of dairy, and their neighbors, the Akikuyu, who were largely vegetarian, ate very little meat and dairy, very, very little meat and dairy. And there's a stark contrast. The Maasai were far healthier, far taller, more
They look
lean body
strong. They are
mass,
ripped.
very strong, and have like 45-inch vertical leaps and things like that. I mean, there's massive
Yeah.
jumps, and very athletic people. They fight lions with sticks and they win. I mean, this is absolutely amazing what these people do from a physical standpoint, and they're extremely healthy. And they did not have any nutritional deficiencies either that the British could find out, but the Akikuyu did. They had tons of them. And the Akikuyu were much more sickly. They got much more diseases, chronic diseases, infectious diseases, and Maasai really didn't. And so it was, and it wasn't until they, and the British even gave like nutritional supplements to the Akikuyu to sort of make up for these nutritional deficiencies, and they still didn't actually recover. They were still getting sick more. They're still getting infectious disease and all these or other sorts of things and chronic diseases. It
Yeah.
wasn't until they swapped out plants for more meat that they started recovering and getting more healthy. So, meat has been very, very vilified, but the amount of nutrients you need is very different. And, going back to the calcium thing, think about it this way. I'll give you two examples, both in cats. So lions, when a baby lion will drink its mother's milk, which has a lot of calcium in it, right? So, okay, there's a lot of strong, healthy bones there. Okay. But then when the baby lion is weaned off its mother's milk, it's not a full grown lion at that point, right? It's
Yep.
weaned off its mother's milk onto its mother's diet, which is just meat. And then actually the majority of long bone growth happens after it's weaned. So obviously there has to be enough calcium in that meat to grow all the bones in a lion to get from a baby lion to an adult lion, which is a big animal.
And they don't
And then
eat dairy.
yeah, and without dairy. And then where did the mother lion get the calcium for the dairy, for her
Right.
mother's milk? Right. Well, it got it from the meat, obviously. So actually, there is quite a lot of calcium. It's just being used properly. It's not being stripped out of their body
Yeah.
because they're not taking in oxalates. The other example I'll show is in a study called Pottinger's cats, which is a very interesting study. And people know about Dr. Weston A. Price. There's the Price Pottinger Foundation, which was the original foundation that he set up, and now there's a Weston A. Price Foundation, which is more recent. But the Price Pottinger Foundation, this is with that Dr. Pottinger who did this study, Pottinger's cats, who just actually recently found out was my mom's doctor as a kid, which is very funny to know about. And he was all about, hey, you need to eat raw liver and these sorts of things, and raw meat and raw liver. But he did a study in cats and just domestic house cats, and he found that they're actually studying tuberculosis, and they thought it was something to do with the adrenal glands. So they wanted to take a bunch of cats and remove their adrenal glands and see how they responded to tuberculosis. And what they found is that all the cats weren't surviving surgery, and they were dying shortly after or in surgery. And they were like, oh, what the hell is going on here? And they had people doing autopsies saying, yeah, well, the surgery went fine. There's no complications to the surgery. Yeah, we don't
Was
know
it
what
the food?
happened. Well, yeah, so that was the thing. They started getting a lot of people. This is back before people were spaying and neutering, and there's just a lot of, stray cats and things like that. And people were just, they said, oh, they found out that, Dr. Pottinger was doing experiments on cats. So everyone was just bringing in these neighborhood strays and it's just like, just get rid of it. And so they all of a sudden they had way more cats than they knew what to do with. They were making meat for them. They were just like cooking up some meat and mince and things like that and giving it to the cats. And then they sort of got so much, they're like, "Oh, we can't cook for all of them. We'll just give them the raw meat." And all the raw meat cats survived surgery. All the cooked meat cats died from surgery. And they went, hold on a second, is there something that we're losing by cooking? Is that are we losing nutrients? Is there some difference between the cooked meat and the raw meat? So he did a multi-year experiment. I think it went on for like 12, 15 years. And multiple generations of the raw meat cats were all healthy, 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 all interested in mating and play and very healthy, big, strong, healthy bone structure and all the rest. And then the cooked meat cats, the only difference is the cooked meat. It's the same meat, it's just cooked or non-cooked. And the cooked meat cats got smaller in size every generation, and they had lower bone mineral density as well. It went from 14% down to 7% in the second generation, down to 3% in the third generation. Exact same amount of calcium in that meat. Calcium does not cook out from meat when you cook it. So it's something else. It's the physiological mechanisms that we have in place. So we have all these nutrients that have a very delicate balance. Then when they get out of balance, our body can't function properly. And so cats require taurine. Taurine gets denatured when you cook it. And there's other things in there too that they need as well. Taurine's a major one. This is why when you look on pet food, you'll look at all these different sorts. They maybe have some
It's
meats,
being
but they don't
added to
put in
cat
a
food,
bunch of
yeah.
crap. But there's generally taurine. You'll see
Yeah.
taurine in there because they have to have taurine. And so just not having that amino acid and some of these other things that got cooked out made it so they couldn't process calcium properly. But also you have osteoclasts and osteoblasts, which are the cells that build up and break down um, your bone structure, right? And so when they don't have the right materials and they don't have the right signals, they're going to break down more than they build up, and you're going to have very low bone density. You're going to have osteoporosis and things like that. And so you absolutely get all of the calcium you need. So those cats were getting all the calcium that they needed, but their body couldn't process it properly and they couldn't utilize it properly. And so that's the important thing. And so when we're eating a mixed diet, we're not able to utilize the calcium available, and we need an overabundance. Or maybe we don't, because we have studies in women and thousands of people with thousands of people showing that regular supplementation with calcium actually increases your risk for cardiovascular disease by 15%. And so maybe we're
It
actually
goes
getting
into the
too much
arteries, right?
calcium. Sorry?
It goes into the arteries.
It can, yes. You can calcify your arteries. You can calcify different parts of your body. You can get calcified leaflets of the valves in the heart, and have to replace your heart valves. And is that it's going to be from a combination of things, but that's going to be probably influenced by an abundance of calcium that you probably don't need, but also your body's not able to utilize it properly. And so you have this pathological deposition of calcium as well. And so instead of going in the bones, you're getting it in places it has really no business being. And that
Yeah.
just comes from not eating properly. And just like with Pottinger's cats, they were eating technically the right food, but not in the right way. And so they weren't getting the right nutrients. And they were getting horrible problems as a result of that. And they were getting very poor development at the third generation. So just feeding the cats here, and then second generation, third generation, right? So just two generations down, just two birth cycles, they became sterile after that. They couldn't actually procreate. They weren't even really interested in mating at that point. And
Yeah.
any
They were just
population,
sick.
they were very sick. And any population loses interest in mating, that's because there's something wrong. They're sick. There's a
Yeah.
problem. And so they did that. And even when they did mate, they couldn't have live births. They only had stillbirths, or didn't even get pregnant at all. And it wasn't until they switched them back onto raw meat that the third generation then became healthy and they recovered and they were able to procreate. And then that next generation didn't actually get back up to the same stature and development of the raw meat cats. It took 4 generations to breed back to the
Well,
raw meat cat. So
it's a
that
good
is
thing
actually,
that we are adapted to cooking our food. We don't need to eat it raw.
well, we've been cooking food for at least 1.5 million years. Yeah. And
Yeah.
we don't require taurine. Most of us don't require taurine. Um, Conditionally, you may require taurine because taurine is made in the liver, it's secreted in the bile, and then it's reabsorbed in the gut with the bile when you eat fat. And so you're not eating fat, and you're eating a lot of fiber, which can bind to bile. And so you eliminate it out in your stool. This is how people say, oh, this is how Cheerios lowered cholesterol and was heart healthy because it lowered cholesterol, because cholesterol is so toxic. Our entire body's made out of cholesterol. I guess we're just walking, poison dumps, or we're just poisoning ourselves the whole time.
That brings me to another
Um,
question, actually. So there's
mhm,
one group member and she is on a SIBO protocol. So she is belching, abdominal pain, bloating, and she thinks it's because all these bacteria and fungi are dying off.
mhm.
Now, what if fiber absorbs endotoxins produced by these dying off bacteria and fungi? Would that maybe help in that case? So I'm not saying everyone should eat fiber, but in that case, would that help binding these toxins and help getting them out?
Well, there's a few dependent factors there, right? Because it depends on if that's really what's going on. And so you're getting the diagnosis right is really important, because if you don't get the diagnosis right, you're not going to get the treatment program
I I
correct.
think SIFO is was diagnosed, yes.
What I'm saying is like are the problems she's having coming from these endotoxins and things like that they're secreting? So is that her problem? And B, is fiber actually going to help? Is fiber actually going to soak those things up, bind them, and eliminate them? So there's a lot of ifs there. And so if that is the case, and if fiber would indeed bind those toxins, then sure, you can use that medicinally. The thing is that she probably wouldn't have had SIBO in the first place if she had just been on a carnivore diet. There have been case
He's
series,
on
so
it
it's not
now.
like, yeah, great. So, a case series, which is, it's not a, very high level of evidence. It's not experimental data, but it's a case series where people went on specifically a carnivore diet, and resolved their SIBO in a month or two, and it at least significantly improved it in all cases. So um, it's
So you don't need a protocol, you just go carnivore and that should resolve it?
Well, we don't have large experimental trials showing that, but that is what people are finding. That's in the published literature as far as case series are concerned. So, a series of multiple people who have done this, and they've done that anyway. So, and we will have to sort of see. But when you look at people around the world, they are doing this, and that seems to be a protocol that people are going on for this, and it just sorts it out. Your gut bacteria eat what you eat. And so you have this
Yes.
bacterial overgrowth because you're eating things that you're not supposed to eat. And so you're getting bacteria where you're not supposed to have them. And so what you do is you starve them out. And so a lot of these things typically run on carbohydrates, and some of them can eat fiber as well. And so you really just want
So
to
adding
eliminate out,
fiber might
remove the
actually
food
make it
supply.
worse.
Could potentially, yeah. But if you have a specific strain of bacteria that can't eat fiber, and makes these toxins that then get soaked up by fiber, that's potentially a benefit. But it's a lot of guesswork. But the thing is, though, you can do some self-experimentation, and you try taking like a fiber capsule or something like that, and see if that helps. If it does, fine, but
Yeah,
it's not
maybe
something you
not even
take long
eating
term.
fiber, but just a fiber capsule. Okay, so
Yeah,
we're
because
almost out of
the fiber
time. I need
comes
to get to
with
the
other things, right? The fiber
I need
comes
to
with
get to
plant
the
toxins.
questions from the community.
Mhm.
One says, uh, uh, I am confused by the many variants of carnivore which range from high fat to low fat and everything in between. I don't need to lose weight much, maybe 6 pounds, but I need to lose my high body fat percentage. I read that PSMF folks, they say not to add fat if you want to lose fat. So I'm confused.
Yeah, well, that's
And a
certainly a
lot of
theory.
influencers say that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, but that just goes back to the whole thing of fat makes you fat, and it's just not the case. In fact, you burn what you eat, and so if you eat fat, you're going to burn fat, and so it's actually not the case that if you eat fat, then you're just going to put on a bunch of fat, and you're not going to go to your fat. That's just not the case. In fact, the best studies, the best diet for weight loss and fat loss in particular is a high fat, low carb diet, high fat specifically. And so
kind of like
that
80% or
70 to 80% calories from fat. So the same percentages. Also, what's good for you now should be good for you later. And what's best for you when you're at a stable point should also be best for you at an unstable point where you're sick and you're unwell. What's best for you is
right,
best for you, and
right.
so the thing is that you should, you shouldn't have to change up how you eat. You get in these patterns of behavior where it's like, oh, I have to avoid fat, and then you're avoiding fat and you're avoiding fat. Yeah, you'll lose weight, but is that beneficial? Are you doing it in a healthy way? I mean, people in concentration camps lose weight, but that doesn't mean that that's a good thing and we should all do that. It's you want to do
People
something that's
on
going to set
meth
up
will
pattern.
lose weight, and that's not a good thing to do.
Say again?
People on meth or alcoholics
Yeah,
lose weight,
exactly.
and that's not a
Yeah,
good thing.
yeah. So there's many ways to skin a cat, and if your end objective is just lose weight, okay, well, there's a lot of ways to do that. But if your main objective is to be as healthy as you possibly can for as long as you possibly can, then that's a very different discussion. And you will lose weight, you will lose body fat, you will put on lean body mass, and you will gain health. But you can do it other ways as well. But what is the most healthy way to do it? That's what I'm interested in. And
Yeah.
so, and what is setting down a pattern of behavior? What you're doing now should be setting up what you're going to be doing in 10 years, 20
And
years.
it's got to be
But if you,
sustainable too.
yeah, and so if you're going to do something now, but it's like, but then you switch, and then you do, and this other time you switch here and you switch, it just confuses things. It makes things much more difficult. And if you're doing something for a year or two to lose body fat, to lose weight, that's just how you live now. And then you're in that mindset of, oh, if I eat fat, I'm going to get fat. I'm going to get fat. Oh my God, I'm going to get fat. And then so you avoid this stuff for the rest of your life, and that's not healthy. Fat is not just a calorie source. And
No,
calories are not calories are not calories, not in our bodies anyway. And so fat is an essential nutrient. There are essential
and carbs are not.
fatty acids that you have to have or you can get sick and die. And there are essential fat soluble nutrients that you have to have or you can get sick and die. And it's not just like, oh, we have fat on our body, so that all the fat soluble vitamins are just sitting there. No, not necessarily. They can be very nutritionally deplete. And so you may not have the fatty acids and the fat soluble vitamins that you need. And you need them. You need them in your diet. Your body has a specific capacity to absorb fat. I don't think that your body has just guessed at this and said like, oh, we'll just randomly absorb a random amount of fat. You have 5 organs working in concert just to absorb fat. Your stomach and stomach acid start breaking down the food. Your liver makes bile, which is you have to have bile to absorb fat. You can't really absorb fat without that. Gallbladder stores bile. Your pancreas makes digestive enzymes like lipase to break down the fat, and your small intestine absorbs it. So you have 5 organs all working together just to absorb fat. And when you run out of bile, you don't absorb fat past a few percentage points. It's under 10%, and mostly MCTs. And so the vast majority of fat is eliminated. You really physiologically cannot overeat fat. And so I don't think
I
for a
guess if you
second
do,
that nature
you
just
would
messed
probably
up.
poop it out, right?
You do. Yeah, exactly. It just goes out in your waste. You cannot absorb it. So it's not that your body is excreting fat into your intestines, which is sometimes I think people have misunderstood when I've said that. It's just you're just not absorbing it in the first place. You'll absorb what your body needs and wants, and then the rest of it goes out in your waste. That's actually what keeps your stools soft,
All right.
is the little bit of
3
excess
more
fat.
questions because I want to get them all in. And
Sure.
the one is for a 45-year-old woman who's been on carnivore for over a year. What would ideal macros be for trimming off 5 points of weight? that just snuck on for no reasons.
Yeah. So you really can't make macros. The thing is that, you know, our biochemistry and body are far more complex than any equation is ever going to be able to figure out. But the good news is that you don't need to figure it out because your body figures it out for you. When you're eating what you're supposed to eat, you can listen to your body. So you just eat fatty meat, sort of in that proportion, 1 to 2 grams of fat per 1 gram of protein. You listen to your body. You want to absorb all the fat that your body is requiring. I don't think your body's guessing. It's making a random amount of bile to absorb a random amount of fat. And as long as you're not taking ox bile and absorbing more fat than your body actually wants, you just eat fat until you don't absorb it anymore. And,
Right.
you know, so
Is
if you're
that maybe
constipated, you're not going to get, you're by definition not eating enough fat. Constipation is dry, hard stool. It's not infrequency because you're going to absorb 98% of the meat that you're eating. So you're already going to go a lot less, but it needs to be soft still. If that softness is that little bit of extra fat that you didn't need, and so your body eliminated and went into your stools, kept it soft. Eat way too much, you're going to get diarrhea. So just get it to the point that you're getting enough fat to
in the
keep your
middle?
stools soft, and you're not drinking coffee, tea, taking magnesium, metformin, or artificial sweeteners because those will act as laxatives, and that'll sort of screw up your experiment there. And you just eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. You eat enough fat so that you're not constipated, and that's it. And as long as you do that, your body will perfectly track your macros and micros to get you the nutrition that you need, and will regulate your body and your body fat percentage. And that's the thing. Long term, you continue to do this. So when you're losing weight and you're trying to lose excess body fat, you eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good, and you get those proportions in that way. If you're trying to put on lean body mass and put on muscle, or you came from, you know, eating disorder and you're very underweight, you eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good, and you try to get those ratios. If you're just trying to maintain your health, you eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good, you get them in those ratios. If you have diabetes, you eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good, you get them in those ratios. And so this applies to everybody in every way. And it's not that, well, I need this many grams and this many this and this. No, no, just eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good, and, you know, get them in those proportions, and your body will do the rest. And as long as you're listening to your body and you're eating enough, you'll be fine. You'll get plenty of protein. Well, how many grams of protein? Well, you actually do know that you do need a certain amount of protein. You're going to get more than that, way more than that, on a carnivore diet if you're eating fatty meat until it stops tasting good and you're getting them in those proportions. And so that's what you do for every situation, every person, every time. And your body will tell you. And so if you're sick, you're under the weather, you're going through something, you just don't have an appetite, great. Eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. Well, one bite, great. Eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. Your body is telling you something. It's saying, hey, you need to fast. We're working on other things right now. We can't dedicate 40% of our blood supply to our intestines right now. We need that elsewhere. So just chill out, don't eat, rest, recover, and we'll let you know when we need some food. And so that's what you do in all these situations. And if you have to sort of micromanage and want to take this and take this equation, do this in this circumstance, and eat less fat here and eat more fat,
Yeah, we never
it's
used to
overly
do that
complicated. I
until
mean,
like, I don't know,
yeah,
50, 60, 70 years ago.
well, what animal in nature does that? You know,
Yeah,
I mean, what koala pulls
none.
out a calculator like, well, no, 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 I need to eat the stems, I need to do this, I need that. They
And I
just
still
eat.
need 3 glasses of water. But
Yeah,
it
well,
brings me to the second question, that people on carnivore often tend to, what did you say? Why do you think most people on carnivore start rejecting poultry? They will still have some pork, bacon, but chicken becomes the red-headed stepchild quickly. And I see that in myself too.
Mhm,
I like just a chicken breast is just not appealing. Chicken wings,
mhm,
maybe, but that's
mhm.
it.
Yeah. Very little fat in chicken breast
Yeah.
specifically. So it's very bland. And so that's why you don't normally have to dress up chicken breast. But that's what was foisted on us since the 1980s, because fat was bad, cholesterol was bad. And so we go away, and we reduced our red meat intake by over 33%. And we replaced a lot of that with chicken and chicken breasts and things like that, because, white meat is okay because it's less fat. No, you want to take the skin off, and, well, you don't want the dark meat because there's more fat. There's more nutrients in the dark meat, and there's more fat in the dark meat. Fat is a nutrient. It's not just a calorie source again. And so when you're eating chicken, it's just not going to do it for you. It's not as nutritious. It doesn't have as high of a nutrient density, and so it doesn't taste as good. You taste that taste, that flavor is nutrients, and so that's why fat is flavor, as any chef will tell you. And so fat is a nutrient, and we get fooled with olive oil and this and that. We were tasting that fat, and your body's like, "Ooh, fat's really important," but it's not the right fats. Butter, lard, ghee, tallow, those sorts of things. That's very nutritious fat, and those are the fats that we need. And
Or like
so when you're
tallow if you're a little dairy intolerant, or is ghee still fine?
Most people do fine on grass-fed ghee, but if you don't, then tallow. I think tallow's, as far as the nutritional compound and components go, tallow is probably one of the best things that we can eat. Grass-fed tallow is
Ooh,
is
I make my own
fantastic.
now.
Yeah, good. Yeah,
Yeah,
nice.
because I need it at the lion diet. I can't use
Mhm.
butter.
Yeah. So it's no, it's excellent. Tallow's fantastic. But most people do fine with butter, and the very few people that don't do fine with butter, do fine with ghee. That takes away the rest of the milk solids, and it's just the fat. And I haven't really come across anybody who responded negatively to ghee anyway. It's been very rare. I mean, I can't really think of anybody who's really had a problem with butter either. It was just sort of like, well, maybe is it the butter? Just try cutting it out, see what happens. And then sort of didn't really hear back from them. And so I don't know what the answer to that was, but it's still very, very rare, even if those did turn out to be people that had problems with butter. But either way, you just listen to your own body, and if you think that something's causing an issue, you do what you've done, which is you just cut out everything. You just go on the lion diet, just do red meat and water, and then in a month maybe you try adding back in some butter, and it's like, okay, is that fine?
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
feel
no.
great on
Six
that.
months.
Fine.
6 months.
Sorry, six
Six
months. Yeah,
months.
perfect.
I'm going
Yeah.
6 months. Yeah. But first
Oh,
time in
nice.
2 years that
Hmm.
a inflammatory flare has receded by itself. First
Yeah,
time
right.
without cortisone. So
Yeah,
that's power.
nice.
Last member question.
Mhm.
My body cannot handle electrolytes. I take magnesium to RDA and below 1 gram of Celtic salt a day, but any more raises blood pressure significantly.
Mhm.
I also have to be cautious with potassium supplements. Why am I so salt sensitive? It seems to go against all these experts like Dr. Fang and Dr. Nicol Antonio.
Well, the fact of the matter is that we shouldn't have to supplement anything, even electrolytes, on our natural biologically appropriate diet, right? No animal needs to go out and get supplements. Now, they will take advantage of mineral licks or salt licks and things like that, um, but they don't need them to survive. And it's thought that we really only started turning to mineral salts after the agricultural revolution. And so if you're eating a mixed diet, again, you will need a different mix of nutrients, and electrolytes come into that as well. Again, magnesium gets stripped out of the body by all sorts of different anti-nutrients. Caffeine is an anti-nutrient, will strip out magnesium, and so will phytic acid and all these
I
other
don't want
sorts
to
of
hurry
things.
here about caffeine.
Mm. And so that's the thing, is that
Yes.
we're all of us are deficient and need to supplement all these sorts of things because we're eating things that screw with that. When you're just eating a carnivore diet, you shouldn't have to do that. Now, maybe you come from a deficiency, and so maybe early on supplementation might help catch you up faster, but long term, you shouldn't have to do this stuff, right? Especially if you're having, very good quality meat, grass-fed and finished, and a bit of organs and things like that, which have a much higher
But salt,
nutrient.
yes, right?
And sorry,
Salt. Salt is essential.
salt,
Hmm.
added salt isn't essential actually. When you're first transitioning to a ketogenic diet and your insulin is coming down, you can lose too much of your electrolytes, because
Okay.
insulin is important for retaining electrolytes in your kidneys. But you weren't born with high insulin, right? None of us were. We're actually all born in a ketogenic state. Babies in the womb are in ketosis. Babies that are breastfeeding, even though they're getting lactose, are in ketosis. And so insulin levels are actually quite low. And so it's only later that we're just inundating ourselves with carbohydrates. We have 4 grams of glucose in our entire circulatory system at any given time. And that's all the glucose necessary to run all the physiological processes of your body and your brain. 1 extra gram is toxic, and our body treats it as a toxin by trying to detoxify it by raising insulin. And that would be all well and good if insulin, the only thing insulin did was just drive energy into cells, but it's not. Insulin has over 100 different mechanisms in the body. And so you elevate it to try to get your blood sugar down. You're elevating it and disrupting all these different mechanisms. And one of those mechanisms is retaining more electrolytes in your kidneys than your body actually wants. So it has to compensate and actually try to excrete more electrolytes because it's getting this stronger pull from the insulin, right? So your body has to compensate. And as you go and you're eating hundreds of grams a day and your body's trying to keep this under 4 grams, and like an idiot, you're eating 400 grams. And, that's obviously your body putting on super high levels of stress and like actual stress. You're stressing your system, not just you're raising cortisol. You're stressing your system and you're pushing it to the breaking point, which is then diabetes. That is the breaking point that your body goes to. Your insulin is going higher and higher, and you're getting insulin resistant, and you need more and more insulin to deal with all of this blood sugar that you're pumping in your body over decades. And so now, instead of having a fasting insulin of 5, you have a fasting insulin of 35. Or I had a patient that had it at 72. Your fasting insulin should never be above 10 ever. And his was 72 when he came in. And so obviously that is bad. And so what's happening? Well, it's drawing in more and more and more electrolytes. Okay, so the body's compensating because he's not turning into a salt lick, right? And so just turning and retaining all the mineral salts and things like that he has in his body, because you die. You get hyponatremic, too low, you can die. Hypernatremic, you can die. And the same with potassium and all the other sort of nutrients. You have to have a very tightly controlled range, or you get very sick and you die very quickly. And it's really nasty way to go. If your potassium gets out of whack, your heart stops. If your sodium gets out of whack, your brain stops working, and you can slip into a coma, have seizures, and die. And so your body has to perfectly regulate this stuff. And so it's not just insulin. Insulin is part of that equation. But as it's creeping up over the decades, your body has to compensate in one direction. Okay, well, now your insulin is dropping down because you're not eating carbohydrates. And actually, it doesn't take decades for your insulin to drop down. It takes a matter of months for your insulin to drop down back to normal levels, a year on the outside. This guy that had fasting insulin of 72, 6 weeks later, he had on a carnivore diet, he had a fasting insulin of 35. So it dropped in half, right? Actually, slightly more than half. And he wasn't, hyponatremic. All his electrolytes were perfect. His body compensated back in the right direction. Very early on, sometimes people do lose more electrolytes because that insulin's coming down so rapidly and their body's trying to adjust back in the other direction, and it's just not quite catching up. So in that time, people sometimes this is sometimes what people think of as a cause of keto flu, that you're losing too many electrolytes. You're dropping your blood pressure, and you just feel pretty off and not feel good. So you add in electrolytes and you feel better. Great. You're also going to detox. You're also going to have other sorts of things. A lot of people are doing keto. They're also adding in way more vegetables than they've ever eaten before, and now they're getting way more
I did.
plant toxins as well. And so that can be a part of the keto flu as well. But from an electrolyte point of view, that can happen. It's more rare than people think, though, because I don't actually see that in my patient population. I don't tell them to take electrolytes. I tell them they don't need to take electrolytes unless there's a problem. And what do you know? We check their bloods and there's no problem, right?
That's
And
interesting,
so,
because I made the experience that when I don't supplement and I use Element Keto Chow or make my own electrolytes, when I don't supplement, my blood pressure actually drops. And I at one point I almost passed out. I had to lie down flat on the floor not to pass out. So my blood pressure goes to 90 over 50 or so. But then maybe this group member is at a further stage where she needs less.
Yeah. So that's the thing. Some people are going to take longer. Now you're in a similar situation to a friend of mine, Dave Feldman, who does the lean mass hyper responders studies. He has to take in like 6 grams of salt a day. He's very fastidious
Yeah, he
about it. Like,
takes
he
them in
just has to
tablets.
take this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, um, sometimes you can, you can, break the watch. You just sort of damage this thing. We're finely tuned hyper precision instruments, and that and if you sort of disrupt your physiology for a certain period of time, it may not be that your body can come back all the way, and you may require something like salt, and maybe it's a temporary thing. Maybe
Oh, yeah.
eventually that goes
I was
away.
on insulin, so like in my
Yeah,
case, it was very damaged. But I don't want
yeah,
to take more of your time.
it's
I
okay.
had like a bunch of questions that I skipped because you were just
Yeah.
this was really interesting. So
Mhm.
thank you again, Dr. Chaffee, for
Welcome.
joining me on my channel.
Mhm.
And I hope to see you soon again.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it. And thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.